Let's walk through this from the beginning, because the story of why the US finds itself in trouble in Iran isn't just about what's happening now. It's about a long chain of assumptions, one after another, each one breaking when it hit reality. By mid-March 2026, we're far enough in to connect the dots. The assumption that started it all go back to February 28th. The US and Israel launched what they call Operation Epic Fury. The opening strikes are precise, devastating, and achieve exactly what they set out to do. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is killed, senior military commanders are wiped out, Iranian warships are sunk. On paper, the first day is a success. But here's the thing about decapitation strikes. They only work if the body can't function without the head. And that's where the first miscalculation happened. Washington looked at Iran and saw a regime on its last legs. The economy was crumbling under years of sanctions. There had been massive protests in January. The so-called axis of resistance, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Assad government, had all taken hits. The thinking was simple. Iran was a house of cards. Kick the door in and the whole thing collapses. There was just one problem. That assessment was wrong. The day the narrative shifted in the days immediately following the strikes, something happened that the Pentagon clearly didn't see coming. Iran didn't descend into chaos. Instead, the system backfilled. Within days, a new supreme leader was in place, Ayatollah Sayyid Mujtaba Khamenei. And on March 12th, his first message to the country was about one thing: national unity. The government officially declared the coming week as the Week of National Unity and Solidarity for Iran. Think about that. A regime that was supposed to be crumbling was organizing theme weeks. Meanwhile, the human cost of the opening strike started seeping out. Early reports confirmed that a school had been hit. More than 160 people killed, most of them young girls. Independent military analyst Alexander Alessin put it bluntly: the killing of the leader might have been one thing, but the school strike exacerbated the situation in a way that the planners simply hadn't accounted for. If you were an ordinary Iranian watching your country get bombed and seeing children killed, would you be more likely to rise up against your government or against the people dropping the bomb? The retaliation nobody predicted. Here's where the military situation started getting interesting. The US had planned for a quick campaign. They had about 50,000 troops in the region, 2 carrier groups, and enough munitions stockpiled for about 7 to 10 days of high-intensity operations. The assumption was that Iran would fold quickly, or at least fight in a predictable way. Instead, Iran did something unexpected. They didn't escalate gradually, they went straight to all-out retaliation. Missiles and drones started hitting US bases across the Middle East, not just in one country: Qatar, in UAE, in Kuwait, in Saudi Arabia. The FPS-132 early warning radar in Qatar was destroyed. 4 THAAD batteries, the most advanced US missile defense systems, were hit. Then came March 14th. A missile struck the helipad inside the US Embassy compound in Baghdad at almost the same time. Debris from an intercepted Iranian drone hit an oil facility in the Fujairah port in the UAE. These weren't just military targets. These were statements. Fujairah is one of the world's major bunkering hubs. When you hit that, you're not just sending a message to the Pentagon, you're sending a message to global oil markets. And the markets got the message. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil passes, effectively became a war zone. Oil prices shot past $120 a barrel. The costs nobody wanted to talk about. Let's talk about money, because that's where this story gets really concrete. By March 11th, the Center for Strategic and International Studies had done the math. The first 100 hours of the campaign cost about $3.7 billion. That's roughly $890 million a day. And here's the kicker: 94% of that wasn't budgeted. Other estimates were even higher. Some Republican lawmakers privately worried the daily cost was closer to $20 billion. Even at the lower end, by March 10th, the US had already spent over $110 billion. But the financial cost is only part of it. By mid-March, at least 13 US service members had been killed. A refueling aircraft crash took 6 crew members, others wounded in missile strikes. And as Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth himself admitted, as long as the military action continues, there will be more. Back home, that cost was starting to show up at the gas pump. Morgan Stanley estimated that oil prices had jumped 42% since the conflict began, which would push US inflation from 2.4% to 3% or higher in the coming months. For the average American family, that means paying about an extra $10 a week for gas. $10. That has to come from somewhere else: groceries, rent, medicine. And the public? A Reuters poll in early March showed only 27% approved of the strikes, 43% disapproved. By mid-March, that number had likely shifted further. The plan that wasn't there, here's the part that keeps coming up in analysis after analysis. Was there ever a real plan for what came next? Senator Chris Coons, who sits on the Foreign Relations Committee, pointed out something obvious but important. There's no modern example of regime change achieved solely through airstrikes. You can blow things up, but you can't bomb a new government into existence. The Trump administration's goals kept shifting. First, it was about nuclear weapons, then ballistic missiles, then protecting protesters, then regime change. Hegseth insisted this is not a so-called regime change war, while simultaneously urging Iranians to take over your government. The Boston Globe ran an opinion piece that cut to the heart of it. Bombs can weaken Iran's regime. They can't replace it. The author Matthew Levitt pointed out that even if 81% of Iranians oppose the current system, there's no organized opposition ready to step in. Years of repression have decimated any coherent alternative. And the groups that do exist, monarchists, secular Democrats, exiled figures, agree on little except wanting the current regime gone. That's not a government in waiting. That's a recipe for chaos. The media war by mid-March, the tension between what the administration was claiming and what people could see with their own eyes had boiled over. On March 13th, Hegseth held a Pentagon briefing that was remarkable for one reason. He spent a significant chunk of it attacking the media. He accused reporters of running fake headlines like "Mideast war intensifies" or "war widening it." He suggested that a patriotic press would run headlines like "Iran increasingly desperate" or "Iran shrinking, going underground." He singled out a CNN report suggesting the administration had underestimated the impact on shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, calling it a fundamentally unserious report. Here's why that moment matters. When administration officials start lecturing the press on what headlines should say, it usually means they're losing the narrative battle. They're seeing a disconnect between what they're claiming, that Iran's navy is gone, its air force is destroyed, its leaders are cowering, and what people are watching on their screens: missile strikes hitting embassies, oil facilities on fire, gas prices climbing. And on that point, there was a deeper issue that wasn't getting enough attention. The legal justification for the war was shaky from the start. In closed-door briefings with Congress on March 1st, Pentagon officials acknowledged something significant. There was no intelligence suggesting Iran was planning to attack U.S. forces first. The administration had told reporters the opposite, that the strikes were preemptive, based on indicators Iran might strike U.S. forces perhaps preemptively. But in the briefings, that justification evaporated. Where we are now by mid-March, the situation had settled into something nobody planned for. The U.S. claims to have struck over 15,000 targets. Hegseth says Iran's missile volume is down 90%, its drone attacks down 95%, its navy gone, its air force destroyed. By his metrics, the campaign is a success. But here's the thing about destroying a country's military capacity: it doesn't necessarily end the war. Iran is still launching retaliatory strikes. They're still hitting U.S. bases. They're still targeting oil infrastructure. The Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed. On March 14th, the U.S. ordered elements of the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit to the region. That's the kind of unit that does evacuations, embassy security, potentially ground operations. The administration says it doesn't necessarily mean ground troops are coming, but when you send Marines, people notice. Meanwhile, President Trump sends mixed signals. One day he says the war will end very quickly. The next, operations continue as long as necessary. Israel's defense minister says something different entirely, that the operation will continue without any time limit. So why is America failing? If you step back and look at the whole picture, the answer is actually pretty clear. America is failing in Iran because the entire strategy was built on assumptions that turned out to be false. They assumed the regime would collapse if the leader was killed. It didn't. They assumed Iranians would welcome liberation. They didn't, especially after schools got hit. They assumed airstrikes alone could force regime change. History says otherwise. They assumed Iran would fight a predictable, limited war. Instead, they went straight for the global economy, hitting oil infrastructure and closing the Strait of Hormuz. They launched a war with very large goals: regime change, eliminating nuclear programs, destroying missile capabilities, but limited means. No ground troops, no occupation plan, no alternative government ready to step in. Just bombs and hope. And now they're stuck. The costs are astronomical. The public is opposed, the media is skeptical, the allies are nervous, there's no clear victory condition, and there's no clear exit. On March 12th, Iran declared a week of national unity in Tehran, in Shiraz, in Mashhad, in cities across the country. People showed up, not necessarily because they love the regime, but because they don't love getting bombed by foreigners who lecture them about freedom while killing their children. That's the part the planners in Washington never understood. You can't bomb people into wanting what you want. You can't destroy a government into being replaced by something you like. And you can't fight a war based on wishful thinking and expect reality to cooperate. $11 billion later, with more than 1,000 Iranian civilians dead, with American families grieving, with the global economy teetering, the dream of regime change is exactly that, a dream. And like most dreams, it never survived contact with the morning light.